Welcome to another episode with me, Yvette. I'm a Palestinian American, and I'm here with my good friend Richard Forer, who's author of two Palestine Israel books, Breakthrough, Transforming Fear into Compassion, and Wake Up and Reclaim Your Humanity. He spent a lot of time researching and writing these books, and we get together to educate people. So, Richard, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Morning. So the question for you today is, can you tell us what is the root cause of the Israel-Palestine tragedy?
Yeah, that's a very good question because no one ever discusses it. And when they do discuss it, I've never heard anyone give a what I consider anywhere near an accurate answer. Let me just point out that usually people, when they talk about the root cause, which is very rare, they'll say the answer is anti-Semitism or settler colonialism or the Nakba, that happened in 1948, the catastrophe for Palestinians. But if you ask why those things happened, you'll get an answer, which means that those things cannot be the root cause. For example, if you say, well, why was there settler colonialism? Well, the answer is, well, because there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and a lot of Jews migrated to Palestine and became settlers and started taking over the land. Same thing with anti-Semitism. Well, why was there anti-Semitism? Well, there's a lot of reasons, one of which is that in the fourth century, the Council of Nicaea declared that the Jews were responsible for the killing of Jesus Christ. And that has been a meme for for almost 2 millennia. It was in the 1960s, for example, that the Pope, I think it was Pope Paul VI, or it might have been just before him, Pope John the 23rd. Anyway, one of those popes declared that the Jews were not responsible for the murder or the death of Jesus Christ. So, my answer to the question is, first of all, the Israel-Palestine tragedy is not at its heart is not a territorial, political, ideological, cultural, or religious problem. It is a psycho-spiritual problem. It is a problem of the mind and of identity, which is what I refer to as the spiritual component. Therefore, my definition of the root cause of the tragedy is the attachment to a presumed, limited, and mortal identity, and to the beliefs and images that emanate from and reinforce that presumption. So, for example, what I'm pointing at is that how we define ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we identify ourselves is an illusion. So, to give you a very simple example, what if I had been born, when I was born to a Jewish family, what if I had been kidnapped as a baby and taken to Saudi Arabia and raised as a Wahhabi Muslim? Would I identify myself the same way I did for most of my life until 2006 when I recognized the illusion of identity? No, I would have seen myself as a Muslim, and I would have embodied, for the most part, the beliefs and images that are common to that culture and that society. And therefore, I might have become, as many Muslims are, or not many, but a number of them are, I might have had enemy images with regard to Jews. I might have seen Jews through the lens of them being dishonest or occupiers, for example, occupiers of the Palestinian people, or something like that. I would have seen them in a negative way. So what I'm saying is, if people will really think about this definition, that the attachment to a presumed, limited, and mortal identity is the root cause, and the beliefs and images that emanate from and reinforce that presumption, they will start to recognize how their upbringing colors the way they see the world. If I'm brought up with the idea that the world is anti-Semitic, then I am very likely going to interpret events in a way that confirms my beliefs. Okay, we're always confirming our identity. I said in one of our other videos that the main purpose of the ego or of our identity is to preserve itself, validate itself, and aggrandize itself. And that's what we're always doing. And this is why, when you look at the definition, it's not just a presumed limited identity. It's a mortal identity that we are attached to. This is why so many people get so furious and will do anything, as we see with the state of Israel, will do anything with no boundaries to protect their identity. They will even send their children to war to kill or be killed rather than inquiring into their identities. Most Israeli Jews grow up and are taught that the Arabs, in particular the Palestinians, though they tend to use the word Arab so they don't have to give any to recognize the existence of a Palestinian subset of Arabs, but most Jews in Israel grow up with, and in my generation in the United States, grow up with the belief that the Arab world hates Jews and wants to push it into the sea. Okay? Now, when they grow up with that belief, it becomes part of their identity, as does their nationalism. And we see that in the United States, we see that all over the world. But their nationalistic feeling for their country and their victim identity, which is part of the consciousness of Israel and many Jews who identify with Israel, the fact that the world hates Jews and Jews, therefore, are always the victim of anti Semitic people, that colors the way we see the world. And that is an illusion. It's not who we are. Who we are is far greater than all of that. Who we are precedes these beliefs and images that we have incorporated through, that we have unconsciously incorporated. And when I say unconscious, most of what I believed, I didn't hear as a teaching. It was not taught to me in words. I picked it up, as did most of my friends, non-verbally, through a kind of emotional osmosis, where we just sensed the feeling within our Jewish community that we had to be more kind of insulated because the world around us did not particularly like Jews. Jews were not allowed in their country clubs when I was growing up, things like that. And the language, a lot of the language that you would hear would be like, "What are you trying to do? Jew me down?" If, for example, you were bargaining to buy a car. So this illusion of identity is the root cause, and everything else grows out of it. The ideological, the political, the territorial, the religious, and the cultural problems that exist are all a consequence of the root cause. And a corollary to the root cause, which I consider another universal principle, is that the real enemy is not someone or something outside of us. The real enemy is the unexamined mind that unconsciously projects its suffering onto the other and then blames and scapegoats the other for its suffering. So, for example, if I grew up believing that the Arab world hates Jews and there's problems, there's fighting that breaks out between Israelis and Palestinians, I'm automatically going to assume it's because of anti-Semitism, because the Palestinians just want to push the Jews into the sea. They cannot accept the existence of the Jews in Israel, right? And but why does that? But so who is the real enemy there? The real enemy is my mind for seducing me into believing these falsehoods, for seducing me into ignoring the real dimension of the problem, which is the human dimension, which is the fact that an entire people, the Palestinians, are being subjugated and persecuted by Jews. And they are being subjugated and persecuted by Israeli Jews and the Jewish community at large, which gives their moral support to Israel and makes it possible for Israel to get away with this. They're being supported by that all through an illusion, okay? And it's not necessary.
Is anti-Semitism real or not real?
It is real, but it's not as it is real. It's not in general as real as it was when I was young, but it certainly is not as real as the Zionists, the people who identify with Zionism, the ideology of Zionism. It's nowhere near as rampant as they would have you believe, because they would have you believe that criticizing the policies of the state of Israel is equivalent to anti-Semitism. In other words, if I criticize Israel for killing Palestinian children, believe it or not, most people will get very upset because I'm threatening their feelings. I'm threatening their sense of self, their identity as humane and fair-minded and just people. So when I criticize Israel, or you or anyone criticizes Israel for its cruelty and for its mistreatment and persecution of human beings simply because they are not Jewish, these people will take it personally because their identity is so fused with Israel. Israel is a part of their identity. So when you criticize Israel, you're criticizing them. And they want Israel to be seen the way they want to be seen. And
Mhm.
their self imagery demands that when they look in the mirror, if they look in the mirror, that they see a fair-minded and just and non-prejudiced person who does not discriminate against Palestinians, whose only criticism of Palestinians is not because they're not Jewish, it's because they want to push the Jews into the sea and because they're psychopaths and serial killers, to quote Benny Morris, one of the
But
great Israeli historians.
how can they possibly think that they're being just to the Palestinians when at the same time supporting people or using language to dehumanize Palestinians and have been using language? How can they be both? How can they look at the mirror and think I'm a just person and at the same time be using that type of language?
That's a great question, and it boils down to what I call the primary disposition of human beings, which is more pronounced in some people than others. And that primary disposition is existential fear and confusion. So they are confused. They don't see that Israel is persecuting the Palestinians. They interpret what Israel does as necessary for security. Okay. When Israel kills children, and I've heard this from many Jewish people, including myself at one time. None of us read it anywhere. None of us were taught it anywhere. But what they see is that inherently the Palestinian people want to destroy the Jewish people. And the only reason Jewish soldiers kill Palestinian children is because Palestinian militants embed themselves within civilian populations. And the reason they do that is number one, so that when Israel tries to kill them, they may accidentally kill a child, and then the militants can blame the Jews for being child killers. They can slander the entire Jewish nation. So you could, if you really look at things, you can look at the Nazis, you can look at Zionism and what Israel has done to the Palestinians. You can look at the rise of all kinds of movements throughout the world, the Khmer Rouge in Palestine under Pol Pot, and Stalinist policies. Everybody, everybody can rationalize what they're doing. I promise you, well, we've all heard Donald Trump say that he's the most compassionate person in the world. He's not a racist. There's not a bone in his body that is racist. I'm sure Benjamin Netanyahu can justify every single thing he does. If you ask him if he hates Palestinians, I'll bet you he will say no, but he doesn't like Palestinian terrorists. And you hear the dialogue in Israel all the time.
Do you think he
Leading
actually believes
politicians in
that?
Israel call Palestinians terrorists and Nazis and cockroaches. So if they identify the people, an entire people in that way, there's no problem with killing them because all they're killing is cockroaches or Nazis who want to kill them.
Right. There's a lot of confusion in what he.
Tremendous confusion. It is the primary mudra. Mudra is a yoga position that represents a certain state of energy. It's the primary mudra along with existential fear, the fear of self versus other, which in its pathological state becomes us against them. You start off identifying yourself as separate from others not part of your community, which is
Mhm,
framed, which has a
mhm,
certain boundary to it. It's not universal. And
mhm.
then eventually, as if your hatred grows, if you're continually taught or continually judge events in the world as being anti-Semitic, that pathological state of us versus them will start to grow.